Okay, great. Well, a warm welcome everyone to this session. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm Penny Newton-Hurley and an associate of CMP Solutions, and here to talk a little bit about psychological safety in organisations. So what I'm going to cover today is really what is this concept of psychological safety? Why is it important in organisations, not just for the individual, but for the team and for the organisation as a whole? What are the barriers? Why do we feel psychologically unsafe sometimes? And then sort of looking at the angle of, so what do we do about it? How do we build psychological safety? How do we measure it? And what are the key enablers to allow a more psychologically safe culture? So there'll be a chance for questions at the end. I will really try to leave a good 5 minutes or more. So do pop any questions as we go along on the Q&A there. But first of all, I'm going to ask you a question. And for this, you can use the chat. What does psychological safety mean to you? How have you come across it? Have you felt psychologically safe in the workplace or psychologically unsafe? So I'll just give you a few moments to think about that before we go on to the definition of psychological safety. Okay, just looking for the chat. Okay, thank you. So taking off our metaphorical mask, yep, mask wearing, yeah, and being able to be our true selves, being able to speak our truth from the heart. It contributes to the feeling that you can be yourself, yeah. How often do we cover up ourselves? How often do we not really say what we believe or think for fear of, etc.? So yeah, being our true selves. Any others? Otherwise, we'll take a look at the definition. Okay, well, if you think of anything else, put it up there. So in CMP, we're certified fearless organisation psychological safety facilitators. And our definition is that psychological safety is knowing that when we articulate our ideas, questions, concerns or mistakes, that they will be constructively received. So in other words, it is about speaking up. It's about speaking authentically, being our authentic selves. It's about not overcoming that fear of speaking, saying an idea because we might think we might be intrusive or that we might be deemed as negative. About not, when we ask a question, perhaps, we fear asking a question, especially in a group of people when everyone seems to be going for, or understanding it. So we don't want to look silly. We don't want to look incompetent. That holds us back. It's about being able to say, yeah, I got that wrong. I made a mistake, without fear of reprisal, retribution, somebody considering us that we've done something wrong, or that negative consequences might ensue, and raising a concern. Well, I'm not quite sure about that. In a group of people, when everyone seems to be agreeing, how comfortable is it for us to not agree and to say, actually, I think something different, or do we fear rocking the boat? Do we fear looking negative, or being branded as somebody who doesn't conform? Sometimes we fear the career consequences. So Psychological safety is about being able to do all of that, to do it comfortably, to be able to know that your speaking up will be received productively and constructively. So, Amy Edmondson, Professor Amy Edmondson, she didn't find this, it does predate her, but about 20 years ago, she talks about the fact that she came across psychological safety. She was actually doing some research in the medical arena in care. And she was looking at high performing teams and low performing teams. She was interested in the ability, in how what the correlation was with making errors. And she was fully expecting to find that those teams that weren't collaborating so well, weren't so high performing, would be making more errors. But in this research, she found it was coming out that it turned out to be the high performing teams that were making the high errors. It was the opposite to what she expected, and that made her question deeply. So with further research, with further observations of these teams, she then discovered the fact that it wasn't that they were making more mistakes, it was that they were reporting more mistakes. They were able to discuss their errors. They were able to look at them in a way that, okay, how can we learn from this? How can we improve? And that's when she says she discovered psychological safety and the real importance of being able to talk about these things comfortably within the team. And so to Amy, what she says is that psychological safety goes along with motivation and accountability, standards of performance, let's say. And the bottom left, if you've got low standards of performance and low psychological safety, people turn up to work, but they're guarded. Their hearts and minds may be elsewhere. It's not a great place to be. It doesn't feel good, and it's not particularly good for the organisation. If you've got low standards but high psychological safety, it's the comfort zone. So collaboration might be happening. It might be, good relationships are going on, but there's no challenge. There's no growth. And she says that that is less likely in today's society, the way we tend to work nowadays. But the real area of concern is the anxiety zone, bottom right there, where standards of performance are high, but psychological safety, sorry, my voice is going. Psychological safety is low. And what happens there is that people are driving, and it's not about the fear and the anxiety about goals. It's about interdependence. Often in organizations and in this world today, we have uncertainty, and we have this interdependence, and when we can't speak and collaborate, that breeds anxiety, and that makes for difficult situations and non-productivity often. So the best zone to be in is the learning zone. So where psychological safety is high, performance standards are high, people feel comfortable to speak out. They feel they're able to discuss things. They're able to raise their fears, talk about mistakes, give ideas, and there we get innovation. So this is about innovation. It's about creativity. It's about being able to take certain risks, and know that there's that attitude to risks is welcomed, that we do it together and that we collaborate. So there is the zone of growth. It's the zone of well-being as well, really, amongst employees. It's where we want to be. Now, there was also Google research as well, back in 2016, and they looked at their teams, about 180 teams, over a number of years. And you'll see on the right there that they came out with these 5 factors that were really important for high performing teams. So there was the impact of the team on the organisation, on customers, etc. There was the meaning of the individual, that their work really meant something to them. Structure and clarity, they knew the strategy, shared goals, and dependability, that they would meet those goals on time and work together. But the top factor that they found, that underpinned all the others, so not only was it the most important, but if you didn't have it, the others couldn't flourish, was psychological safety. So the benefits that it brought in were, as you can see, more revenue, higher sales, more innovation, diverse ideas, more effectivity, more productivity, more retention. So all round benefits. So let's have a little look about what prevents us from speaking up then. What is it underneath? Now, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a psychologist, but it's interesting to look at what is going on underneath. And I think really what's important about this is we are all human beings, and this applies to all of us, whether we are somebody sitting there feeling psychologically unsafe, or whether we are part of the team that is contributing potentially without knowing to that. So it's to do with our reaction system, the middle, the 3 brains, and the part of the brain where we have our fight or flight reflex, the limbic system, where we see something, we experience something, and we tend to react automatically, instead of engaging the rational part of our brain, where we can then pause, consider the part of the brain that manages and is more reasoning, to be able to then respond more consciously. So it's about responding consciously rather than reacting automatically. And I believe that this is at the heart of what's going on with psychological safety. We all grow with core beliefs about ourselves, our self-confidence, how good we are, whether we're good enough. We also accumulate experience as we go along, when we've spoken up before. So all of this has an impact on who we are today. We bring it along with us, if you like. So when we are, in a situation or in a team generally, and we want to speak up, these things will be underlying, subliminally underlying, and can often be the reason why we don't speak up. As I said, it could be fear of, looking silly because we've done it before and we felt put down, or it could be core beliefs of not having something good enough to say, or any number of things. And the thing is that, whether we're a leader or whether we're a team member, whoever we are in this equation, it applies to us all. So just knowing that, I think, really helps, because for me, it means that we, as individuals, have the ability to help ourselves become more psychologically safe by partly self-awareness, being aware of this, enable us to speak up rather than stay quiet. And also it's about our relationship with other people and how helpful we are towards their psychological safety. What do we project that either helps them to speak up, or maybe hinders them in speaking up, and hinders them and sort of adds to their own stuff that's going on in this realm, like us. So I think this is where some of the underlying factors are. We also have the brain being efficient. We have something like 180, 200 cognitive biases going on in our brain. It's where our brain we have so much information coming in that if the brain were to work through every part of it, it would shut down. It's just too much. So it naturally and automatically filters the information according to our core beliefs, our values, our experiences, what's happened to us in the past. And it distorts something, it sort of pushes that into that category, might generalize something, it might miss something out, it might go along the same path as it's done before. And we call these the biases, and I picked out just three there. Confirmation bias, where instead of perhaps considering all theories and coming up with the answer, we might choose an answer, decide on something, and then we tend to look for something that confirms it. It's a bit like, you know, when you buy something, you make a high level purchase, a car, say, and you know, you bought it, and then you know you are looking for all those signals that you've made the right purchase, because we don't want to think that we haven't. So confirmation bias, we call that. Affinity bias, where we gravitate to like-minded or like looking people. It's a natural thing we do. Underlying these are what we call needs. We all have human fundamental needs, in a principle called nonviolent communication. Marshall Rosenberg used to talk about these needs that we have, and that any one moment we're all trying to meet a need. And very often with these biases, and generally, we are meeting a need for safety. So gravitating towards like-minded people might be meeting a need for safety, safety in numbers, safety that we know, you know, something that we know rather than something that we don't know. And we choose to meet that need, possibly over meeting a need for, say, growth or a need for contribution. And groupthink, I think that one's pretty identifiable. That's the phenomenon of you know, going along with what everyone else says. You know, and in a group or in a team or in a meeting where everyone seems to be agreeing with the speaker, it might feel uncomfortable. So to meet our need for safety, we keep quiet, instead of voicing something that might be contrary to what's being said. However, has anybody been in that situation where actually somebody, in thinking that and in keeping quiet, somebody else might then actually say it and say, not sure about that. And then how many hands go up and say, well, actually, I was wondering about that as well. I wasn't sure. So, you know, that's called groupthink. So all of this is going on and more. Goffman's principle of social management, Bron there mentioned about masks. He talked about this mask wearing where, you know, to protect us ourselves, to have that safety mechanism, we project a certain persona in different situations. So how we show up to work might be a different mask to how we show up at home, you know, with our family, which might be different again to how we show up with our friends or a hobby that we might run. And you know, and then there's nothing wrong with that. Yet it's just to be aware. And a lot of this about psychological safety, I find, is about awareness. Just knowing this stuff can help. So what do we need to do? What can we do about this? And I think it really is down to looking at a culture. Now, that can be looking at the culture of a team, or it can be looking at the culture of the whole organization. But we're looking to change how we deal with each other, basically, how comfortable we make the situations. Amy Edmondson in a book talks about some of the, you know, some of the real difficulties, tragedies sometimes that people get into when these factors are at play. She talks about medical professions, and there was one example she gave of a neonatal, I think it was a nurse or a practitioner, alongside who's just come out of college, alongside a senior consultant, and dealing with um, early birth twins, and she'd learnt something about lung function, and but she didn't say it because she gave way to the senior consultant, who hadn't mentioned it, hadn't talked about it. They were in incubators, and she didn't want to speak up because she feared what the consultant might say. In the end, that example was okay. It worked out all right for these babies. But there are situations in NASA. There are situations, and another example in her book, about a fatal plane crash back in the 70s, where again in that situation it was hierarchy, a captain and a first officer, younger first officer, more experienced captain, and there was an aircraft on the runway, but the captain wanted to get on it. Schedules were tight, and the first officer said, I don't think we're cleared to take off, but the captain continued, and the first officer could have carried on saying it, but he didn't, and it crashed into the aircraft. There were fatalities, about 600 of them. And Amy talks about, what does she call it? She calls it underweighting the benefits of speaking up, and overweighting the cost. So in that example, for example, the cost of speaking up, the fear of talking out against somebody higher, and what that might do for that person as a career. And in that moment, was the protection around that was higher than what he knew to be the long-term benefit of speaking up, which would be the savings of life. So this stuff is quite serious. It can be quite serious, and it's also everyday stuff. This is happening every day. Every day, people are either speaking up or not, and it's as we saw earlier. It's not just to do with those serious moments, but it's to do with colleagues working together for the benefit of each other. Feeling comfortable at work, their mental health. We don't want people to be in their anxiety zone. And it's also for the organisation, for the customers, for all the shareholders, about being productive, being efficient, and effective. So the good news is that we can measure the levels of psychological safety, and I think in the change of culture, we need something to measure this by. We need something for KPIs, and it's boiled down to a 7-question survey that we use, that Amy produced over years of trying different questions. She's boiled it down to 7 questions, and they're in these realms. So it's about inclusion and diversity, feeling included. When people feel included, and that their thoughts are valued, and that their diversity and their unique proposition that they bring is valued, then we get psychological safety. When people can ask for help, when others are willing to help, we get it. When the attitude to risk is one of openness and collaboration, then we get psychological safety. And when conversation is open, we can talk about things. We can talk about difficult things. We can have those difficult conversations. So what we do is we measure in teams. We measure across management teams, and within teams, the level of psychological safety. And we get a team measure. We get a measure against the different domains there as well. And then we're able to open up deep conversations about what is going on in the team, and through these conversations we can divulge and uncover things, situations that have happened, and we can compassionately discuss this so that it's out in the open and we can start to begin to build this safety. So let's look at what would help us feel more psychologically safe on different levels. So what can we do as a whole organisation? What can we do as leaders? What can we do as team members and colleagues and individuals? These things really do cover all of those levels. So it's about what we call in CMP situational awareness. It's about looking at how we have these conversations, how we communicate with each other, generally from organisational communications down to one-to-one conversations. The time and the place, the speed of communication, how early you talk to people about it, the environment we have that conversation in, and what's behind it, the intentions. It's about pausing to consider that and adapting how we communicate in order to communicate in the best possible way to be heard. Then we have the curiosity, and this is about, Amy talks about framing the work, giving people the bigger picture. So, through to organisational change and structural change, what is behind it? What are the underlying factors and intentions? So being able to convey that sort of information, as well as on a one-to-one basis, when we're talking to people, it's about explaining where we're coming from. We talked about authenticity and being open, but also talking about what our needs are underneath, and why we're asking somebody to do what we're asking them to do, and also considering it from their point of view as well. And for that, we need a beginner's mind. We need to be conscious of our assumptions, and we need to be conscious of how we label people. So in teams, if people are labelled as being negative, then that's going to contribute to their fear of speaking up. So it's looking underneath that, it's asking questions, it's inviting input as well, input into decisions, input into anything that we're talking about. What do you think about that? What are your ideas? It's that invitation to be involved, rather than projecting, decisions without that involvement, without people having a chance to have their say. And I mentioned needs earlier on. It's about focusing. When we focus on needs, we call it the PIN model. Positions are all about what he said, what they said, and what we think about something. But when we bring that down to what needs are we trying to meet, on a personal level, on an organisational level, we can really look at what the best strategies are for meeting their needs, rather than conflicting strategies where we are at the level of positions. The third domain here is reflective listening, or capacity, we call these. So building capacities within our workforce, being able to listen to people, truly listen to the underlying factors, not just surface listening, but focused listening. So building those skills of openness and active listening to what people do, and everything that goes with it, the not being distracted, but being focused on a person when they're speaking, through to an organisation listening to their people, really tapping into what's going on, ear to the ground. What are colleagues talking about? What's important to them? And with that comes non-judgment, aiming to get away from a judgmental stance, and that more into that beginner's mind. Because when people are faced with what they think they're being judged on, it prevents people from speaking up. But if people feel they can speak and they're speaking to somebody who is coming with non-judgment, they're more likely to speak up, and then we can have those conversations. And it's about building that trust and openness spiral that can go two ways. You know, when we're not open and trust starts to break down, we go down that spiral, and it can go down, but we can build it up, and it does take time to do this. As we know, you know, trust doesn't come immediately, but through openness, through starting this process of listening and opening up, we can build that trust up. And it's about empathy. It's about compassion for other people and for ourselves as well. It's a two-way street. It's considering other people's viewpoints, considering their needs. It's also showing gratitude. And Amy talks about embracing messengers. If we're going to invite input, ask for people's opinions and thoughts, ask what they're feeling, then we need to embrace them. If we ask for their ideas and we say, well, that's, you know, we've tried that before, it's no good. Or if we ask for them to be open and they say, yeah, I did make the mistake, and we, you know, talk about how poor that was, poor performance, we're not going to get that openness necessarily again. So it's embracing the messenger, thanking people for their input, working with what their input is, you know, being realistic and feeding back on that. And that way that helps to build trust. And then it's about self-awareness. This goes a long way to helping each other build that self-awareness. It's reflection at an individual level, being open to consider, actually, was I making a judgment there? You know, if we haven't spoken up, what's gone on for me that I didn't speak up? And what was the consequence? How can I do that differently next time? What do I need? What support do I need around that? You know, and really connecting with our needs that we're trying to meet and feelings, you know, building that emotional intelligence in an organization. And it has a knock-on effect. You know, the modeling fallibility really does, particularly when we hear leaders say, yep, I got it wrong. It's encouraging. It enables others to do the same. And, you know, by the way, wrong doesn't need to say poor performance, but we all make mistakes. So what are we going to do about it? What are we going to learn, and how are we going to build? So the courage part is about being able to really have that courage to speak up. Amy Edmondson talks about leaders creating cultural, psychological safety, and team members nurturing it. And I think it's all round. You know, we can all start to create that within ourselves and for others, and we can all nurture it as well. So these 5 capacities are what we talk about as real key enablers to psychological safety on all levels. And generally then, as a summary, please do put any questions on. Very happy to take questions. We'll have 5 minutes. But psychological safety, as we've found, is a top factor in high performing teams. It is important. It's hugely important for welfare, for creativity, for innovation, for productive teams, for collaboration, all round. Also, the point about we're all susceptible to feeling unsafe. We're all in it together. So, you know, although we have hierarchies, we all are susceptible to these feelings of protection for ourselves and not wanting to speak up, the mask wearing. So knowing that, we can all work together to get over it, to start to build around it. And I'm often asked, where do we start? What do we do to start building psychological safety? Well, I think firstly, it's about raising awareness. We do a lot in just make this very sort of session, make people aware that this stuff goes on. Often I hear, oh my gosh, yeah, now I can really relate to this. I relate to this. I think just about everybody can relate to situations when we haven't felt safe. So it's about raising awareness. It's about measuring, getting into teams and measuring our levels, and then opening up the conversations and creating the environment to have those conversations comfortably. They can be difficult, they can be uncomfortable, but we can do things to make them more comfortable. We think of it as a tree, and the soil, the diversity of our leaves, the roots being our needs that we all share, the tree being the inclusion, and the soil being the environment that creates psychological safety. So, yeah, creating psychological safety and nurturing it, leaders, team members, we can all take our part. So, yeah, we can all get involved. And it does, in some instances, involve a culture change, and that can build gradually or it can come top down, and it can work within teams at a level, and it can work within organizations. So I'd like to open up now to see if there are any questions. I hope that's sort of given you a bit of an insight, a bit of an introduction into this vast area. I've been within psychological safety only about 2 or 3 years per se, but I am learning as I go along. So there's so much to uncover. Just we've had a comment. Safety doesn't always mean safety. It could mean gravitating towards the known or what is already in our repository of experience, like people going back to toxic situations, still seeking safety as that is all that is known to the person. Yeah, I guess what you're saying there is safety does sound like, we all have our connotations of safety, but it is very much about individual situations. And yeah, some things can be toxic, and we don't always think of it as unsafe. Yet what happens to us is that sort of caving in internalizing, and that feeling of sort of really closing down, I suppose, sometimes. So what else does Richard say there? Let me see. Safety, yeah. Right, okay, so yeah, any other questions before we finish? Great talk, thank you. Oh, good, you've read the Fearless Organisation. Yeah. What are the recommendations? I have got a book, but it's not here, and I cannot remember what it is. But it's there's this chap gives 4 other areas of psychological safety to look at and the way to build it. If I can, I'll try and pop it on somewhere afterwards. But if you go and Google psychological safety books, it usually comes up with this other one as well. Yeah, so Amy is great. This other one, and I wish I could remember what it was, is good too. I think Richard's posting something there. Yes, I think, Richard, that's a document that I've seen that is particularly good. So I would definitely, if that's the one I'm thinking of, I would definitely recommend that, because it breaks down it in visual form, and it makes for really good sort of understanding. Yeah. Okay, so we are at time. Timothy R. Clark, Peter. I wish I could remember, but I can't. It sounds familiar, so I think that could be it. Yeah, but I'm making my way through it at the moment, and I'm noticing that it's Amy's got a certain style of writing, and this other one has another style, and I think together you get to build a bigger picture. Okay, yes, that's it. The 4 stages of psychological safety. Thanks very much. Yeah, defining the path to inclusion and innovation. Thanks, Peter. Okay, any other questions? Any other thoughts? Um, has it been helpful? Has it given you an insight? Um, well, you know where we are if you'd like to know any more. There's a bit of contact detail there, and great. Good. I'm seeing lots of hearts and claps. I guess that's I'm not familiar with this platform, but I think that's maybe people saying that they like it. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. And yeah, I wish you well and enjoy the rest of the sessions. Take care. Hope to see you again sometime.